The Black Armory is, to some, one of the weirdest additions to the Destiny universe. For those same few, it seems to not hold a point within the world that we have, and for others, it's just a great way to get some really cool looking and firing pieces of equipment. But you're not here for that, are you? Ada 1 can come off as a boorish, stubborn, even hot-headed exo at times, and in many cases, she has no reason to do so. At least, it seems so, right? The origins of the Black Armory are far more important than you might think, but to understand the connections that affect us in today's city age, we have to first look into how this organization was founded during the height of humanity's golden age. If you're up for reviewing this material with me, then stick around. Ada isn't the only important piece of this family of forges, this Black Armory. Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and before we get started, my last video produced was on a reading of the Black Armory papers. We're a bit backwards here in the Season of Dawn. Now that a full year after the Black Armory and Season of the Forge have come and gone, I'm still covering it. But to me, the Black Armory continues to be one of the most important pieces of connecting lore for us in the City Age. But before I can fully feel confident in revealing that information, I figured a full review of the papers was a good idea. This is also something new that I want to try with my format, especially with newer information from books and so on. Read the lore book entirely for you guys, review it as we are today, then bring up connecting material after that. It's a bit of a book club and a lot of rights. I'll have a short review for those uninterested in a larger one that we're doing here today, of course, soon enough. So if you'd rather a quick refresher, you don't have to stick around for this one. I'd also love your feedback on this series, if you decide to stick around for the whole thing. Anyway, enough preamble, I think you get the idea. The papers themselves are broken down into different entries. After all, this is a journal. My work is pretty well done for me in terms of what to title each grimoire card I have. But what isn't done for me is time passage. That's something that is inconsistent within each entry of the papers, and this causes issues as we go along in reading and trying to understand them. The papers begin with the author, a woman and one of the original founders of the Black Armory, named Henriette, giving us a bit of background on herself. Henriette's mother wanted her to be mindful of what was in front of her face, and what she could tangibly see as she went through life. Really, that would be some of the best advice she could give. But it was masked by a silly hunt for a ghost in their home. No, not that kind of ghost. A spirit. Of course, the spirit relation is not lost on me as we go along with Destiny's narrative. Ghosts from the Traveler were not around during the time of Henriette, or at least not initially. This was the Golden Age, and like all humans, she was able to sit back on her laurels and not think about anything outside in our system. Right? Far from. Henriette's entire purpose for trying to find this ghost in her home was thanks to a general worry or fear of the unknown. It took a more innocent nature when she was a child, but this notion will continue into her adult life. As she says in the card, humanity is ill-prepared for the next major twist of fate the cosmos may have for them, and it will come. If the Traveler could happen, perhaps something similar could also be produced in the opposite manner. We also come to learn that Henriette has a daughter of her own. She wants very much to keep her from the influence of those around her that rely on and hope the Traveler will give them everything and anything for the remainder of their lives. A bold statement in the time of speakers and the study of light. To only rely on humanity? How foolish when the orb in the sky dictates differently, right? Still, we started on entry 10 of this journal, and we've no idea of the entries written previously. We only know what is important to the Foundry, or at least we think so. Nothing to say we couldn't unearth some of the entries later on, with further accounts of the Golden Age or the time after. I should note, this is one reason I find the Black Armory papers and the Armory itself so intriguing. They're a direct link to the Golden Age and early days of the collapse, and Ada 1 is possibly the only exo with relevant accounts of that time period. So much information just there for the taking, if only we would ask. Even if a biased account, it would be still an account. Anyway, 15 entries later, Henriette informs us that we are not alone. Some kind of anomaly has been detected outside of our system. It's unknown what it is, what its purpose could be, and if the Traveler brought it here. It's unknown if humanity even has to worry about it at all. But Henriette uses this as an excuse to begin what she thinks is the best way to help humanity. Kind of funny how Osiris and Henriette shared similar ideas so many centuries apart. In entry 37, Henriette informs us of the success she's had. 3 families all working together, 3 incredibly different women at the heart of the founding of the Black Armory. Henriette Meyrin, Helga Rasmussen, Yuki Sato. The 3 names that would carry us on to a brighter tomorrow. At least so their hope is. Family, however, is the point, and this is why the 3 crests of the 3 main families are seen with the arch of the armory almost all the time. But with production of a good product eventually, the need to spread starts to hit at least one of the founders. While Henriette wants to remain smaller and more intimate as a foundry, which would offer further control of their weaponry, Helga and Yuki ask for the expansion of the armory, especially after their mobile forge platforms are rolled out. The anomaly that was sensed earlier seems to be approaching the Sol system, and the need to prepare is becoming even greater. Against Henriette's better judgment, she allows Helga and Yuki to create more mobile forges for the public, and who knows who decides to pick them up. But that, my friends, is an important tale for another time, perhaps one of the most important. As for the armory, Henriette seems to not be able to win with her co-founders. Helga approached Henriette again, but this time with a different proposition: exos. With the technology that exos offer, they could combine the technology of the phased weapons that the armory was able to create, but instead of having a large platform, they could have a smaller platform to allow for mobility and strategic placement in emergency situations. An exo? Be a forge? The sky could be the limit with having this combination of Clovis Bray and Black Armory technology. But Henriette, as founded in life and family as she was, saw it differently. Recall back to the first couple entries. Her goal for the armory was to be about life and the preservation of it. Her feelings on exos are pretty complete. She feels they have no souls and carry with them no true value as human beings. This was not her vision for the armory. The next day, Helga sends an email to Henriette with the intent to try to cool the waters a bit and further express why Helga feels the need to incorporate exotech into their lineup. The Jotun entry has this email for us, where Yuki was also included in the message. Helga wants to work directly with Clovis Bray on this exotechnology. After all, they're the ones that Helga used to work for, and she left them for her own reasons, quite possibly due to ethics and how Clovis Bray handled things. But I'm sure most of you know the basics involved there, even a little. CB's not the best of companies. Not that the Golden Age seemed to be the best of times, but this is a tale for another day. Actually, part of one we just got done discussing a bit ago, come to think of it. Timing. Important in comedy and in write-ups. Anyway, Helga stresses something important in this email. They could keep controlling interest in the technology while working with organizations that also look to preserve and help humanity. It's the same goal that they have, and no reason not to explore the options. After all, with the engineers in place at Clovis Bray, the possibility was high that the armory's tech could be reverse-engineered and put to Clovis Bray's purposes. Not a great prospect for original designers of the tech platform, especially if used outside the original interests and intents. Henriette's hand is seemingly forced, however, as the Traveler is said to be moving. It leaves Io, though we know that from other information around the story, especially after having visited there. Ikora mentions it was the last place the Traveler touched, or light touched, but I guess that's the same thing. Titan is also in talks to be evacuated. Effectively, the outer system is deemed to be in danger at this point, and who knows how long until the whole system is affected by whatever this anomaly is. You can see how the evacuation on Titan went with the lore book Last Days on Kraken Mare for reference. See, it does fit together, somewhat. Entry 67 talks more on the evacuation of Titan and the movement of the Traveler, while 68 tells us the worst of it. They are here. The Dark, or whatever force was involved against us on Earth, is on Earth, and starts to rip humanity apart piece by piece. The collapse had begun. Another moment that is important to note from Entry 67 is the sign-off of a Project Niobe. Henriette ultimately agrees that if their technology can help humanity, especially with seeing the obvious force of the anomaly in the system, then she thinks it best to help as many as she can. As a character trait of Henriette, she might be hard-headed and stubborn about her morals, but at the end of the day she understands alternative points of view, even if she doesn't fully agree with them. Needs of the many and all that. Funny thing is, she just wouldn't know what kind of repercussions and consequences would come of this agreement, and so soon after. Entry 68 speaks on the collapse beginning, as I mentioned earlier. The family hunkers down inside the Niobe labs, named after Project Niobe. The lab is pretty well hidden, but not entirely. And that's the issue the Armory faces as whatever is outside breaks through the doors of the lab. Firing at whatever it may be, they chase it off, but not after losing Helga. Henriette's daughter is also injured in the firefight, unconscious. From here, Henriette makes a difficult decision. She orders Yuki to start up Project Niobe. We see to what extent Henriette will go for her family, but we aren't entirely clear of all of it until a bit later. Henriette decides it's time to move on from Niobe, and time to move the Armory and what's left of it. And who's left of it? Trouble is, the procedure that Yuki is working on needs to be done, and done in a hurry. Before that, however, they have a small ceremony for someone, and prepare for what's to come. The loading of equipment and manpower takes until noon of the next day. They are just a small group of people at this point, a smaller crew than expected left from the Armory's founding force, 5 strong, and an exo. Project Niobe seemed to be a veritable success, at least for some. Along the road from the labs, fellow humans start firing on the approaching Armory. They could have been marauders, they could have been others just scared of fellow people and wanting to survive. Whatever it was, Henriette makes sure to berate them in her journal. "We have the same enemies, you idiots." So it would seem the traditional fear that humans feel at each other in times of survival had just begun, but who knows how long after, since Earth had been hit with the force that overcame all of its citizens. Were they in the labs for days, weeks, months, hours? Regardless, it would only get worse. After abandoning the trucks they had loaded everything in, they needed to take to foot, Armory equipment in hand with light supplies otherwise. Their trucks were stuck and unable to keep going. All the while, the newly born Exo is asking many questions of her new life. Whatever happened with the exofication, this Exo has no memories of her past self at all. She seems to be new, fully unaware of what she is and her purpose. Of course, we know this is the case with how Exos are born and, well, what happens with their minds overall. But the Exo had the ability advertised in Helga's email to allow a walking, talking forge to produce and work on equipment with the Armory. With this ability, their equipment could stay in good form, and it was a welcome sight for the remaining Foundry members to see what came of their work. The last major piece they would work on, anyway. During the Exo's demonstration of working on a weapon, the Armory was hit by marauders. But this time was different. After taking one of them down, a small red drone brought them back from death, and some of the other abilities they exhibited were not usual for humans of the time. Yuki was hit in the fight, but ultimately the ones we know as Risen ran off. Other members of the Armory were killed at this point as well, so the family just kept getting smaller. This man with the red drone caught up to the Armory again, but this time with an offer. He would spare their lives if they would give up the Exo. Willingly, the Exo stepped forward, until Yuki, still wounded from combat before, told the man that she had the item they wanted, the thing that allowed the tempering of the weapons they used in the Armory, the Obsidian Accelerator. In an act to buy at least Henriette and the Exo some time, Yuki set off a grenade from her backpack, and the man with the red drone fell in a heap. The Exo protected Henriette from the blast, and they both ran for the hills. Successfully for a time, it would seem. The entry from Izanagi's Burden tells this tale from a different perspective, Yuki's. It tells in further detail of the way Yuki convinced the man with the red drone to get away from Henriette and the Exo. It details Yuki's final sacrifice for family. It's one of the only entries we get a feel for Yuki as a whole, outside of a few snippets from Henriette's perspective. Henriette meant a lot to the co-founders of the Armory, always being the heart of them all and keeping a level head. But today was her turn to protect them. Henriette and the XO were alone now. They hunkered down under some shelter, hoping they got away from where they left the man with the drone, and Yuki's body besides. With it being the two of them, Henriette watches the XO grow up, quickly at that. All of the questions being asked of Henriette and why certain things die, while others are not alive, like the car they find on fire in the middle of a road. These things are tough to tell the XO and to fully explain. How do you explain life to someone or something in Henriette's mind that has no general understanding of really much of anything? Without a base point, how do you relate to them? These are challenges Henriette faces in teaching the XO about her new life. They reach their first destination, which is the airport closest to them, but sadly it is ripped apart, set ablaze, and not worth the possible risk. They set for the Mediterranean Sea instead. The two stop at an old amusement park that Henriette used to visit as a child. This place was, however, being overtaken by nature. The question I have is if this overtaking of nature happened before the collapse or after. If after, it could give us a small hint of how long it's been since the collapse first started. As a for instance, Chernobyl is one area that's been watched for some time, especially after the nuclear fallout and radiation took over the area. After humans evacuated and abandoned Chernobyl, it took less than 30 years to start seeing plant growth crack through roads and pavements. In some cases, that's just normal for some cities, but in cases of pure abandonment, and with some proper climate and rainfall, especially in a post-traveler Earth, well, who knows how long it would take and how far along this could be. Chernobyl is a weird case with all the radiation, however. That can actually help in plant growth, so it could be an outlier. Not many examples exist of this, so take it all with a grain of salt. I just find that point interesting regardless. It would give more of a timeline of events in a way if we knew more about that plant growth and so on. Anyway, take your pick of how you would like to read this next entry. Entry 142 discusses the same information we see in the Le Monarch entry. A monarch butterfly lands on the XO's shoulder, and Henriette compares the two. Both of them made from simple means, both of them powerful and different than what they were before. But it's a tough thing for Henriette to discuss openly, just like other pieces of her family life have been. It's tough to remember what this XO is, given her general feelings on the project. This is displayed in a later entry thanks to the song Le Temps des Cerises, or Time of Cherries. It's a song about the passage of time, along with how a land and people would change during a time of revolution. What better revolution than the dark trying to snuff out the light, am I right? Kidding and not kidding aside, tensions are still high between the two thanks to this song and other moments. Per the song, it's a memory of Henriette's husband and a tradition for the French family. Henriette is viewed by the XO as not as nice as the other members of the Black Armory. Henriette seems to grasp this nature in herself, even if it takes a little time for her to admit it, and tries to open up a bit more with the XO. But only a bit. She has such a hard time wanting to open up to the XO about her past. We know the reason why, but it's not fully revealed until later, minus hints and feelings we know of at this point through the other entries we have. Sometime later, they get a welcome sight. Others that have collected in a refugee situation. Other XO, members of humanity, mothers and fathers, families, collected in one spot. The kids are taken by the XO. I'm sorry, Ada. This is the first time within the book that Henriette uses the XO's name, which should tell you a bit about how Henriette is warming up to her further, accepting of her. This is not something that's easy for her to do. Henriette's biases and traditions run far too deep to simply give up those thoughts. But with that layer of anxiety teetering off ever so slightly, she finds a new source. A woman with a drone that takes to the Black Armory equipment the two carry and have. Henriette decides it best to leave the moment that they can, not chancing the risk that the XO be captured or otherwise. Unfortunately, they wouldn't get the chance. The man with the red drone returns, and Henriette knows precisely what they're after. While not fully explained here, were unsure if the whole of the encampment was wiped out by the attacking group of Risen, or if some got away. Henriette and Ada watched from a cliff, watching the encampment be torn asunder, until Henriette removed the prize that the Risen were looking for from Ada, the obsidian accelerator, the same one that Yuki had mentioned earlier to try and give them a chance at survival. The cause of all of this, the secret of the Black Armory's technology. This item was the key to unlock Ada's abilities to work on weapons in her mobile forge capacity. But so we reach the end of it all. But the end of who, exactly? And what? The final entry, as Henriette so marked it to be, lists off an attack that occurred earlier. Otherwise, how could she document it? With the accelerator in hand, Henriette tries to use it as a bargaining chip to get away from the Risen. Perhaps they could take what they wanted and just leave, until one lowered their weapon to Henriette's head. Bang. Henriette was still alive, and the man with the weapon lay on the ground. The group was in shock before taking another swing at Henriette, another loud bang. He was down too. 2 more rounds. Their drones, their ghosts, destroyed. They weren't coming back. Ada ran off far in the distance. Henriette, obsidian accelerator in hand, ran the opposite direction. It was time to go. In the last part of this book, Henriette lays it all out. Ada is, in fact, Ada 1, the only use of Project Niobe that the Black Armory ever saw. She is also Henriette's daughter, named Adelaide. She leaves Ada with a few final words of advice and hopes she understands them before signing off. It would take centuries and only until our guardians got involved that she would ever read them. I won't cheapen it past this. Henriette's final message is important to listen to or read on your own. If you'd like to hear my take on the entry in full, then I welcome you to listen to my reading of the audio grimoires I've done already. I'd rather you hear it all in progression while my mind is set properly on the entry. Thank you for your understanding. Still, there is one more entry important to bring up. Everything after the fact. Ada 1's Lone Wolf goes over a moment where she is sitting in an old amusement park in Vancouver, not Europe, where the papers largely existed and where Henriette and herself had a moment previously, as we talked about. It is called Rocket World, or at least I assume from the missing letters. I wonder if it has any relation to the Centennial rocket in Vancouver at all. Well, just a thought. Things change after all, right? We see how Ada thinks on humanity of the past, before the Traveler, or at least before the collapse. This entry shows us just how much she's grown to understand the base principles of the Armory: family, humanity, and duty. I think it one of the best pieces that show character building for this headstrong character. She thinks back on what it could have been like, and this seems to be a way for her to connect with her mother, whether she realizes it or not. It highlights her feelings of humanity, not of the Traveler and what it did to us and for us. But I hope you understand why I appreciate her as much as I do. She's not quite that cut and dry. Oh, and that man with the red drone? Well, we don't hear much about that until a bit later on in another book entitled Man with No Name. We see that Drifter is going to avenge a group of refugees that he used to hang out with. I suppose this is the ultimate line for it all for this book, but it perhaps gives a hint that the red-droned man survived the shots from Ada 1 and Izanagi's burden. Then perhaps it was Seitan, a warlord that Fellwinter later tracked down and ended. Something against the Iron Decree, but necessary for justice, and the black horse of the Iron Lords. And perhaps there is the end for those that plagued the Black Armory in the early days of the collapse. Perhaps that is the end of the story for them. Until we meet Ada 1, that is. After all, she's the last living vestige of that legacy. There is something vastly important and overlooked to point out about the Black Armory. That is where we're going next. That is the information that I now feel confident I can tell you about. I hope you enjoyed my blanket synopsis of the Black Armory papers. I know this was a bit drier than normal, but I hoped it kept you somewhat entertained at least. And Traveler only knows what kind of edits I tried to put in here after the fact too. In either case, thank you so much for listening to this. I'd love to hear any extra comments you have for me on the Black Armory below, now that the origins are fresh in your mind. Did I leave something out that you feel is more important than maybe I did? I know there is more that we could do with Ada as a character, but I feel that is for another time altogether. The discussion is now on your end. Do you have any thoughts on the connection that is to come for the Black Armory? Do you have your own personal reasons for enjoying them in the universe of Destiny? Perhaps you don't. Let me know those reasons below, and don't forget to subscribe to be part of the discussion later on as well. I hope to hear from you soon. To all of you, no matter when or where you are, I'll see you next space time. Take care.